In an interesting new twist, Valve's new early access transparency system has formally flagged Kerbal Space Program 2. As of mid-2025, the Steam store page now prominently displays a warning note. The last update made by developers was over 12 months ago. The information and timeline described by the developers here may no longer be up to date. So yeah, it's been a year without updates for the game, and this has generated a tide of community anger. On Reddit and the Steam Community Hub, threads about KSP 2 are filled with criticism and resignation. And I suspect many people would feel that it's only fair that Valve have now applied this label. Now, the label itself is exactly in line with the policy Valve introduced in early 2025. It said if an early access game goes a year without a new build or developer announcement, Steam adds a cautionary note for buyers. The policy specifically states if it has been more than 12 months since a build has been assigned or an update news post, Steam will add a note to the store page. In other words, Valve's system has clearly highlighted KSP 2's lack of development progress over the past year. Whilst this isn't necessarily a badge of dishonour or anything like that applied to the game, it seems to me that any new potential buyers that come across this Steam page are very likely going to know what's up as soon as they see that message. In short, whilst Private Division, the original publisher of KSP 2, was sold to a new owner who now nominally controls KSP 2, in practical terms, the sequel essentially looks abandoned to all outward appearances over on Steam. No publisher spokesman, as far as we can tell, has announced a new team or timeline just yet. Now, the thing is, early access is supposed to be a partnership between developers and players, but here, the partnership has frayed entirely. Many within the community now openly discuss the possibility that KSP 2 will never see the planned features. It's now very common to see blunt comments on the internet such as KSP 2 is abandoned, the devs are gone, and why is Steam still selling it? With players pointing out no roadmap progress and no updates despite the game still being sold for $50. Unfortunately, Steam refuses refunds at this point for anyone who's had the game for any length of time, leaving frustrated fans with a game that doesn't match early roadmaps and unfulfilled promises. Now, personally, it surprises me that this game is still allowed to be sold on Steam, and I can entirely understand the calls for it to be delisted from Steam. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments section. For me, it seems entirely unreasonable that this game is being sold as early access, especially for such a high price. Yet, that said, Steam's new warning is certainly a step in the right direction. It's also the first time, at least that I'm aware of, that Steam's new label has been applied to such a high-profile early access release, and it's certainly not going to help those sales numbers. Today, the game only has a handful of players, with Steam charts reporting an average of only 70 to 100 players in the weeks around June 2025, and this is entirely understandable. As a side note, I'm very curious how many of these players are new versus old. How many of these players only recently purchased the game versus players who have perhaps had it for quite a while and still enjoy it with all its bugs and unfinished state. At this point then, we haven't heard anything directly about Kerbal Space Program 2 itself for a very long time. The most recent news revolves around the sale and transition of the game's publishers. No information on the game, just information on the staff, and here's a short timeline of the most recent info. Around about November 24, it was announced that Private Division and most, but not all, of its games were sold to an undisclosed buyer. Later, it was revealed that this buyer was an investment firm known as Havley Investments. A little later, around January 2025, it was reported by Bloomberg as well as a few others that former Annapurna Interactive employees would take charge of the Private Division portfolio under Havley Investments, and that means they officially took over managing Kerbal Space Program 2, or at least in theory, among all of the other titles. This would all be a part of the portfolio they'd now be managing. Unfortunately, no updates were given on KSP 2 at that time. Now, according to Wikipedia, on the web page for Private Division, the publisher has been renamed to Fictions Inc. Fictions Inc. is also mentioned on the privacy policy on the Private Division website. That said, the Private Division website itself still has Private Division branding, so I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but what we do know is that Fiction Inc. is now going to be publishing a new game called Lego Party, a game being developed by SMG Studio and published by Fictions. The good news we can take from all of this is that the label known as Fictions, which appears to have connections to Private Division, is now actually publishing games. That means they are now an active publisher. Whilst that doesn't tell us anything about Kerbal Space Program franchise, it does tell us that this is now a working publisher. And if we want to extend that logic a little bit further and go down the road of hope rather than despair, it does open up a few new doors of possibility for the Kerbal franchise. Realistically though, whilst Fictions Inc. are now a working active publisher, it's still at this point speculation as to whether KSP 2 falls under their banner. In practical terms, KSP 2 still looks abandoned to all outward appearances. And this is underscored by Steam's "The last update made by developers was over 12 months ago" label. As of this recording, no publisher spokesperson has announced a new team or timeline for KSP, so even here in June of 25, we're not really any the wiser on the future of the game compared to how we were around about a year ago. We still don't really know what the future of the game is going to be, or even if there is going to be a future for the game. And that means, naturally, the trust and faith in KSP franchise at this point is deeply damaged. Early Access is supposed to be a partnership between devs and players, but here the partnership has frayed entirely. At some point, a publisher may come along and make a statement, or maybe a new team will appear and start working on KSP 2 again. Another possibility is that an entirely new KSP game will be announced in the future. Yet the thing is, if any of that does happen, then a huge amount of repair work is going to be required, and it may well take a long time for the real trust and faith in the game to return. The sad fact is that events surrounding Kerbal Space Program 2 have deeply scarred the game's community. KSP has been a much beloved franchise for many years and was highly respected not just by the game's player base but by the gaming community at large, and gaining even a fraction of that trust back is going to be a very difficult undertaking indeed. That said, I feel it's well worth pointing out that the original Kerbal Space Program is doing very well. Over on Steam, it's getting very close to 2,000 average players a month, if not just over 2,000 players a month, and has some peak player numbers of over 3,000. These are very good numbers for a game of this age. It's still extremely popular and very well loved. Over on YouTube, you can see a lot of videos are still being made on it, and these videos are getting high view numbers. In other words, the franchise is still very well loved. And if we cast a slightly wider net here to get a gauge of interest over time on Google Trends, and we can look at the Kerbal Space Program 2 keyword as it applies to video games, we can see that interest is now only very fractionally lower than what it was before the launch of KSP 2. You can see right there in the middle of this chart there's a huge spike that was the release and lead up to KSP 2, and a big decline afterwards. The numbers didn't fall too much below what they were initially, and they're slowly picking up again. So it seems that whilst there's a lot of harm and damage done to KSP 2, it hasn't fazed a lot of people who are still sticking with the original. Long may that continue. Let me know about all your thoughts and feelings on this whole situation in the comments section below, because as far as things go, this is a pretty stark example of what can go wrong when games are not fulfilling their initial promises. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. There is another one on the screen right here. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.